Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run! Marshawn Lynch, get off me!
DK. Yes, sir. Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you're going to
This offense, just in general. I mean, you had a guy like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man, all the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hawk Zone Rundown. I'm Armac. That's B. Rice. Gregg Bell joins us on the show. Seattle Seahawks beat reporter and NFL writer for the Tacoma Tribune joins us today on the show. We're really excited about that. Gregg is with the Hawks all the time. He's in that building. So we're going to get to kind of get a feel of like, you know, what's the vibe like now with obviously Mike Macdonald, the new regime, Ryan Grubb, all that new staff, just the vibe going around that building, especially leading up to the draft. And we're also going to touch on the QB situation that we've been talking about. Does Gregg think, hey, we're kind of set, or does he have a good feeling that maybe no, they will go after somebody in this draft and kind of, you know, give some competition and look for that quarterback of the future, even though you got Geno and Sam Howell on the roster right now, and just kind of get Gregg's thoughts about the murky offensive line that's kind of still in play. I know, you know, we want to talk about how, you know, John said, hey, we're not done yet. But, you know, what does that mean and what should we expect? And before we get into anything else, and with Gregg, just some housekeeping, guys. If you like what you're hearing, like what you're watching, guys, go down, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, the like button. And you know, if you share the channel and the videos, that's a huge help for us. Well, and like we've said in the past, everyone that just has supported us, we appreciate it. And yeah, we're just going to keep bringing you guys this good content and all the great guests we've been bringing on. So B. Rice, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, I'm just really excited about today, getting the chance to talk to Gregg Bell. You know, finding out, you know, what's different now. How does he feel that Seahawks are different from Pete Carroll to Mike Macdonald, and what this regime is going to do, and how it'll affect the draft and the rest of the offseason and the, you know, currently the next 6 years of this franchise. So, yeah, it's going to be fun to touch on all those topics because Gregg is right in there. He's in that building a lot of the time. He gets the vibe of what's going on. So I'm super excited for this.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be great. So Gregg Bell on the other side. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We have NFL writer and Seahawks beat reporter Gregg Bell, who writes for the Tacoma Tribune. Gregg, thanks for coming on the show and joining us and talking Hawks this morning.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thanks, Bryce. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're great, man. So let's get into it. So kind of starting off with the quarterback situation. Obviously, the last couple of weeks, we know that we brought in Sam Howell, sort of, you know, John saying he's the backup and he's going to replace Drew and there's no QB competition. So as it's standing right now, you have Geno Smith and Drew Lock. Bryce and I were convinced, Geno and Sam, Bryce and I were convinced that before that we were going to go out and draft, you know, potentially a quarterback in the future. And then when the Sam Howell move came and then sort of that sort of simmered down a bit, and okay, maybe we're not going to do that. We have pick 16 and then we don't pick all the way to like 81. So, you know, we got to address some more important things. And then, you know, with Michael Penix and his pro day and things heating up there, kind of talk sort of started, you know, sort of get going again. What do you think they're going to do with the drafts in a few weeks? Do you see them sort of just going away from a quarterback, or do you see that they might get aggressive at 16 or maybe later on the draft?
Well, Ryan, it's become a running joke on the Seahawks beat to the point now that John Schneider brings it up on his own that he's only drafted 2 quarterbacks in 14 years. It's become a non sequitur. He just, hey guys, I haven't drafted a quarterback since Alex Magoo, and Alex Magoo and Russell Wilson remain the only 2 quarterbacks that he has drafted. It's become almost a trivia question with the Seahawks now. That has to change. They have a quarterback of the present. That was true at the end of last season. That was true after they traded for Sam Howell. They have a quarterback of the present, obviously, with Geno Smith under contract through 2025. But Sam Howell is also under contract only through 2025. His rookie deal ends then. So they don't have a quarterback of the future. And this will now be 2 drafts in a row that they've had higher first-round pick slots that they've had in the entire Carroll Schneider regime since 2010 when they started. Of course, the generational pick last year, 5th overall. I'm of the belief that they were going to take Anthony Richardson if the Colts didn't. And that would make all of this talk moot. Of course, the Colts take Richardson, so they still don't have a quarterback in the future. But to hear Schneider tell it, it's not that he's avoided taking quarterback. It's that the Anthony Richardson situation has happened years and years and years in a row where the guy they really wanted went somewhere else. And they didn't prioritize moving up or getting it higher in the draft because they didn't need to. They had Russell Wilson playing at a Pro Bowl, Super Bowl level for so long. So to answer your question, Ryan, I think the time is now. I think the time was yesterday for them to draft a quarterback. But now the problem is because of the Leonard Williams trade, they really don't have the top-end draft capital to move up to get one of the top 4 guys. So the quarterback dynamic becomes who's available at 16, and more to the point of what John Schneider likes to do, who would be willing to trade up that is below you, that needs a quarterback, or somebody else that they covet, that you can move down and perhaps still get your guy at quarterback. When I went to the combine in Indianapolis at the beginning of March, I was of the belief the Seahawks could trade down from 16, as John Schneider has traded 9 of his last 12 years. He's traded his original first-round pick. I was of the belief they could trade down from 16, perhaps late into the first round, and pick up that second-round pick they currently don't own, and still be able to draft Michael Penix. And the performance that he did off the field at the combine, talking to people and interviewing, and the medicals that were cleared, and some of the concerns that teams had seemed to be allayed about his 4 seasons of college cut short by major injuries. And then the pro day performance he had, of course, he should have a good pro day. They're controlling it. But that is combined to make me believe that perhaps Penix won't last until late in the first round. The Seahawks could trade down again. So are they interested in Bo Nix? Are they interested in Joe Milton from Tennessee? Are they interested in somebody else who may be available and let them still do what they want to do? If they don't draft a quarterback now, then they are kicking that can down the road next year when they would almost have to, because you can't trade for a starting quarterback other than a guy like Drew Lock or Sam Howell, who led the league in interceptions. You can't trade for a starting quarterback without it costing you for years, both in salary and draft picks. So if they don't draft him this year, they're going to have to draft him next year. I think they want to draft him this year, and it almost makes too much sense to take Penix, but I don't know if Penix is going to be available past 15, 16.
Yeah, no, Greg, that's kind of the vibe I got too at the combine, watching everything, listening to yourself and other guys talk about it, that, hey, Seattle can trade back and Penix might be there early second round if they get the pick, or late first round, and you're still able to recoup some of that draft capital that we all know John Schneider loves to have multiple picks in that meat of the draft, as he calls it.
Right.
Third rounds into 4th and 5th round.
Yeah. Do you guys really, Ryan and Bryce, do you really think that John Schneider is going to sit from 16 on Thursday night to 81?
No.
Not a chance.
Just sit there and play solitaire for 65 picks? No, there's no way that's going to happen.
No, and I look, the thing for me with John Schneider and the drafting history he has is the only draft I can remember where he didn't really get those picks was the year of D. Eskridge, Forsyth. They had
They only had 3 picks.
3 picks. That was it.
And that was a philosophical choice, Bryce, that year because of COVID.
Right.
They decided that whole year they're going to punt the draft because of the COVID situation. Some guys were staying. The guys they coveted were actually staying in college and taking a COVID year. Some of the guys they didn't get to scout as much because they didn't play until the spring seasons in some cases, or didn't play at all. That's why that happened. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so it's going to be, for me, I agree with you, Greg. They have to take a quarterback. They need to take a quarterback this year, because you look at next year's draft class and, like you said, you kick the can down, then you're forced to do it. And next year's class doesn't, in my opinion, have nearly as much top end talent as this year's. Like, you've got a couple guys, like the one guy, and we had Dan Viens on the other day, and we were talking to him about it. The one guy I felt if he'd come out this year, that John Schneider would have been totally enamored with, kind of like Anthony Richardson last year, was Quinn Ewers from Texas.
Right.
Like, he dropped Quinn Ewers at one point out of the blue for some reason. I can't remember what it was. He was talking about some other guy from Texas and brought up Quinn, and it was like, that's odd. Like, that was out of the blue, kind of the thing like John Schneider tends to do. But I think they would have been all in on him as well. But next year, he might be out of your reach, because if he has another good year like he did, he might be the top quarterback in the draft class next year and be a top 5 pick. And unless they somehow fall apart this year and are worse than they were last year, like you said, you're not in range to get that guy. I would like to see Joe Milton. If they can't get Michael Penix, Joe Milton, because I feel like if you're going to take a swing at quarterback, take a swing at somebody with intangibles. Like, Bo Nix to me is Alex Smith. A little bit more athletic, but he's Alex Smith. He doesn't push that envelope or that ceiling. There's nothing about Bo Nix that makes me go, wow. Where when you have a Michael Penix, a Joe Milton, their arm, their ability to do certain things kind of gives you that wow factor and that intangible that, hey, if they put everything together, they could push us into that next echelon. They could win us games. And that's the way I always look at quarterback is you have guys that you win because of, and then you have guys that you win with. Geno Smith to me is kind of a win with guy. Like you said, he's a present guy. He's been a journeyman, but I don't know there's too many games where you can say, hey, Geno, go out and win us the game like a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow or Josh Allen type, where the rest of your team can be horrible. Like, you look at Patrick Mahomes' receiving core this year, they weren't anything special, and he kind of willed them along the way in the playoffs. So yeah, I would like to see them take a quarterback this year. I just don't know where they're going to do it. And that's the thing I'm worried. Like you said, John's not going to sit there from 16 to 81. And I don't think Michael Penix is going to be there after 16.
The thing that makes Bo Nix a wild card to me, Bryce, is Oregon rarely asked him to throw the ball past the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And rarely over the middle of the field, down the field, that you have to in the NFL to succeed. He threw a lot of bubble screens and stuff quick hitting right off the line of scrimmage at Oregon, and it worked. And he's somewhat untested against top competition down the field. He did some more of that at Auburn, but that's where Penix, of course, excelled. And I think, I mean, I'm a little biased because I didn't watch up close in-person games of all college quarterbacks, but I covered the last 3 Michael Penix games at Washington, the Pac-12 title game in Las Vegas. I was there for that. I was there for the Sugar Bowl on New Year's night, and I was in Houston for the national championship game. And what struck me most, guys, about Penix wasn't the deep ball accuracy that we'd seen the last couple of years. We all saw that. Everyone west of the Mississippi knows about that. No one east of the Mississippi or Hudson River knows about it because they never watched the Huskies on the West Coast games. But which was also funny is, by the way, at the combine, everyone's like, wow, this Michael Penix, he's amazing. And we were all like, what the hell have you been watching for the last 2 years? But what has been, to me, what I found by covering the team those 3 weeks, his leadership. The Huskies would run through walls for that guy. And after the Houston game, the national championship game, we lost to Michigan, it struck me in the locker room that those guys were just as upset for Penix not winning the title and his career coming to an end as for themselves. And that Penix played hurt last year. He had a non-throwing shoulder injury in the national championship game. He had rib injuries in the national title game. And guys, if you turn on the tape of Michael Penix, what most impressive play he may have had last season that NFL teams probably are watching and looking at that position, the last throw he had of his college career was an interception. A Hail Mary jump ball at the end against Michigan. There was only a couple minutes left. They're down 34-14. He threw the pass at about the 35-yard line. The Michigan guy runs across the other side of the field, is on his way for a touchdown. And I was watching from the press box in that stadium in Houston, number 9 in white run from his 35 to the opposite 5-yard line to force that DB inside to a teammate that tackled him to prevent a touchdown. A throwaway play, garbage time. He just thrown an interception. Easily could have just unbuckled his chin strap and walked off the field like most quarterbacks would have in that situation. And he stayed in the play for about 65 yards and prevented a touchdown. That to NFL teams speaks volumes. about his character, about his leadership, about his teamwork and his ethic and ethos. And that's what you need at quarterback in the NFL. A lot of guys can sling it, but can they rally guys? Can they motivate and inspire dudes, especially ones that are older than them with families and mortgages and kids? And I think Penix can. And that's an intangible that I think NFL teams are just now waking up to through this combine and pre-draft process that maybe they didn't know before. And I think that's some of the reason you're hearing the buzz of Penix perhaps being a higher first-round pick than before.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Greg. And we always say that about, sometimes it's a gift and curse, being in the Pacific Northwest, because nobody really knows about you, until they do, right? And then, that's why we feel like even, going back to the Russ situation, and a lot of people are just watching Russ highlights, and then, when me and Bryce looked at it, and a lot of people say, when you're really watching it the last couple seasons, you sort of see this decline, and there's no big surprises or shocks to us. But but you know what, pivoting away from the quarterback and looking at another need, obviously the interior of our offensive line, and John's come out and addressed that, we're not done yet with that in free agency, and because there's still a lot of question marks. You lose Damian Lewis, obviously we weren't going to pay him the salary that he received, which was pretty incredible. And then you also got like Abe Lucas question marks. They bring in George Fant. We kind of look at that like maybe a bit of an insurance policy, and it's a little better than bringing Jason Peters off the couch like we did last season. So, bringing a quarterback in is all good, but if that interior is, still got a lot of question marks, how confident are you? Obviously there's still work to be done, but how confident you think you're going to be kind of going into the next season with that offensive line? Are you confident that we're going to shore it up, or do you think it's going to be like a wait and see, move chess pieces around and see what happens next year?
If it's the latter, Ryan, they're not going to the playoffs. They're not even getting out of the division.
Right.
They are so light years behind San Francisco and even the Rams on the line of scrimmage on both offense and defense. I mean, the last 5 49ers Seahawks games have been literally men against boys on the lines. It just absolutely steamrolled by San Francisco's offensive line against the interior defensive front of Seattle. And Seattle's offensive line has not been able to do anything with Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, and those dudes. And until that changes, guys, they're not going anywhere. They're not even getting out of the NFC West. They're not having home playoff games because you have to win the division to get those. So you're not going to the Super Bowl, period, end of story. So as much as we'll talk about quarterbacks and they have to draft one, they have to fix the offensive line. Oluwatimi will probably be the 10th starting center in 10 years since they traded Max Unger for Jimmy Graham. They've just decided we're not going to deal with the center position. We're going to mix and match, and we're going to bring in one-year free agents who are about to retire to their farms in Iowa, and we're going to bring in Evan Brown, who's an undersized guy, really smart, and we're going to have him for a year and let him go. That has to stop. They need a center who can play for 4 or 5 years, can be an anchor guy that can be both strong enough to take care of the 49ers defensive front and smart enough to make the pre-line calls. And they need him there for more than a couple months. Oluwatimi has the potential to do that, but we haven't seen it yet because he only played one game last year, started one game at center. So that's one issue. Both guards are issues. They let Phil Haynes go because he was injured so often, and then they didn't get fully out of him last year, so he's now still an unsigned free agent. Anthony Bradford had to play 6 games because of injuries last year and was forced into action. He's still largely unproven. I think Anthony Bradford is going to be a great run blocker because he has a mentality of he wants to just smash guys, but we don't know about him as a pass blocker yet. And you mentioned left guard, Ryan, $53 million. The guard market exploded on the Seahawks, and they couldn't even afford Damian Lewis or any other top flight guard. So now they got a guy like Tremaine Ankrum, who never started in 4 years at the Rams, and signed him to a veteran type minimum deal. Nick Harris played some guard for the Browns, and of course with the All Pac-12 center from Washington, he signed a 1-year minimum salary deal to potentially compete at those spots. I just mentioned 3/5 of the offensive line, and you mentioned right tackle Abe Lucas coming off a knee surgery and a knee issue that hasn't been right since they drafted him 3 years ago from Washington State. They're not sure when he's going to get back on the field, if they're starting training camp or not. Now we're talking about 80% of the offensive line, with Charles Cross being the only semi-sure guy, and he had his troubles in pass protection last year. They have to fix this. And the most cost-efficient long-term solution way to do it is through the draft. And there's two guys. There's a guy they are absolutely in love with. Schneider, Ryan Grubb, Scott Huff, both have coached him. And that's, of course, the Troy Fautano guy from Washington that would fix many of their problems. A stud tackle who can play guard. At the UW Pro Day I covered last week, guys, at the Dempsey Indoor, he got a lot of Seahawks attention. Troy Kirshner there was scouting side. Snyder was talking to him. Snyder was front and center for his position drills. I'm not sure, because of his value and versatility at multiple positions, if he'd be available at 16 or later in the first round if they do, of course, trade down, as they always seem to. But one of those two guys, or Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, who went to Mount Tahoma High School, he's just a mauler. I had a guy on KJR this week tell me, a draft expert tell me, that he's just a glass eater. That's the quote he used for this guy. And Oregon State ran more than anybody in college football last year, 55% of the time. And he was the mauler on the right side of Oregon State's offensive line. Perhaps they could get him late in the first round. He's not seen as Fuanga's top end, but the point is they have to fix the offensive line for the longer term instead of these plug and play Noah Fant, Nick Harris signings. Until they do, Geno Smith won't be the best quarterback. Kenneth Walker won't be the best running back. The offense won't be the best balanced and at optimum efficiency as long as the offensive line remains the way it's been for years and years and years. You could argue to a certain extent Russell Wilson's maximum abilities were curtailed by the offensive line, even in their Super Bowl years.
Why do you think that is, Greg? Like, why do you think? Because I look back at Mike Holmgren's era, and they did a much better job of prioritizing that offensive line. And I know Mike was an offensive-minded guy, so you had Robbie Toback, you had Hutchinson and Chris Gray and all those guys, and that line stayed together for so many years until Hutchinson left, and then it kind of fell apart after that. But it's never seemed since that 2012, I say, the 2014 Seahawk era there with, Giacomini and, Max Unger, that ever since they made that trade of Max Unger, they just deprioritized, in a lot of ways, the offensive line. And I've never understood why they did that. I don't know if that was a Tom Cable thing or whatever, because, I remember when they started, I think it was Drew Nowak at center.
Yep.
And he couldn't even snap the ball back to Russell half the time without it going left or right. Like, it was, it was a bit of a nightmare. So, and we talk about that COVID year draft, and they took D. Eskridge when Creed Humphrey was still sitting on the board.
Yes, he was.
And that drives me nuts to this day, because if we have got Creed Humphrey sitting in our locker room right now, who knows, like you said, what happens to Russell, what happens to that whole offensive line and how it's built. Do you think now, with Pete out of the building, and even though they say that he's got some advisory role, which I don't think is actually true.
No, he's on North Shore, Hawaii. He has nothing to do with it.
Kind of what I figured, yeah. So do you think now with Scott Huff there and Ryan Grubb, both with offensive line backgrounds, that becomes now a focused priority group for this regime going forward now?
Yeah, Pete Carroll asked Mike Solari and Tom Cable and Andy Dickerson to be absolute wizards, to create something out of nothing, to convert low-cost flyer type draft picks and low-cost signings into starting NFL linemen, former college defensive tackles. Noah Fant was, George Fant was a basketball player at Western Michigan and barely played football when the Seahawks had Tom Cable turn him into an offensive tackle. I think they are going to shift on that. And I don't know how much of it was Schneider saying, look, we're going to pay DK Metcalf and we're going to pay our skill position. And when Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett, you can't spend money like that across the entire roster. You don't have enough money. It's not Major League Baseball. So you have to make choices on where you aren't going to spend. And they philosophically decided not to spend on the interior offensive and defensive lines. And how many times have we seen them sign a defensive tackle in June or July? Al Woods, or any of it. You can name 6 of the last 7 to 10 years they've done that. They'll do it again this summer. They've decided that they're not spending money on the big guys. They'll just make do and figure it out, and they'll pay the skill guys. And now that like you mentioned, Scott Huff brought his own line coach from UW. Now John Schneider, this is his opportunity to reallocate his resources and decide, okay, we may have to start drafting and going younger at the skill positions so it's less expensive, and start investing more, both in free agency and in high draft picks on the line of scrimmage. I keep saying it and writing it. Until they do that, guys, they're not going anywhere in the NFC West, period. So I think they've come to the realization after having the 31st ranked run defense and no running game mostly for the last 2 or 3 years that, yeah, we're going to have to start fixing the interiors of the lines. And that's going to be a change philosophically, both in money and high draft capital.
And that's saying a lot too, Greg, considering that, like you said, the Rams are ahead of us, and they just had probably arguably the greatest defensive line player in NFL history in the last however long retire. And
Right.
we're still behind them.
Right.
Our ability to handle him without Aaron Donald. When you watched his retirement highlight video, half to 3/4 of it was him in Russell Wilson's face.
Yeah, it looked like Seahawks season in review videos watching
pretty much.
Highlight.
That's crazy. You mentioned, and it's frustrating because you want to talk offense, and you got Ryan Grubb coming in this year, and we're excited because obviously you wanted to change as far as the offensive outlook, and you still got DK and obviously the emergence of JSN that we're all excited about, and you want to see some creativity and see things getting going. Man, the way the O-line is right now, I mean, do you see like what can Grubb do? Maybe add some pieces, like you said, the kid from Washington, but again, they're still young guys, they're still rookies. It's going to take time. Do you see something Grubb can do that's going to give some hope to this offense, just to kind of not be as stagnant that the way it's been the last couple seasons, especially with the firepower that we do have at receiver and the young backs?
Well, that's why Snyder and Mike Macdonald hired Grubb, to do just that, to extend the offense, make it vertical, play it off the run game. People forget that Michael Penix was as good as he was the last 2 years because they had Dylan Johnson running for 1,000+ yards in Washington's backfield. And I was convinced that the Michigan national championship game went south in the first quarter when Dylan Johnson couldn't run. And because he was injured, Michigan didn't have to honor the run. And Washington's number 1 in college football offensive line didn't run block because they didn't have a running back to block for. And I thought that entirely changed the entire game and put Penix under siege. They have the horses, like you mentioned. They have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet as a 1-2 punch in running. They have the ability to do what in skill positions, to do what Ryan Grubb did at Washington, but they don't have the offensive line to do it with. So to your point, they are going to have to draft, and that is going to take time. Outland Trophy and Remington Award winners on the offensive line take a while to excel in the NFL. It's just when you're facing Aaron Donalds and Nick Bosa's every week, it's a little different than facing Montana State and Sacramento State in your first couple games in college football. So this is going to take a while. The problem, of course, is the Seahawks don't have a while with their skill position guys currently constructed. They have Geno Smith under 1 year for sure, and maybe 2 years max. They have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf's contracts ending in a couple of years. Lockett has almost advertised that he's not playing forever, and he's looking at the end of his career coming up pretty soon. They only have 1 tight end returning of the 3 they had last year, with Noah Fant, the $21 million they invested in him. So there is a finite timeline to their skill position guys as currently constructed. JSN's the only one who's got at least 3 years left on this team, more than 2. So it's weird, Ryan, because this development of they're going to have in the offensive line is going to go past the shelf life for the current skill positions guys they have. I am of the belief, this is an aside, I'm of the belief Geno Smith is part of the solution here and not the problem. And that if he has a competent offensive line that can give him a run game, he can be a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. We've seen his Pro Bowl performances, especially 2 years ago, when Kenneth Walker was able to run somewhat. But if you're asking him, to Bryce's point earlier, if you're asking him to be the guy to carry you to the Super Bowl, no, that's not going to happen. And actually, rarely in the NFL does that happen without a running game and an offensive line. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem for them between development versus what they have contractually committed to their skill position guys. And we haven't even talked much about the 30th ranked defense in the NFL yet. So you can see why there's holes to plug here.
So speaking about that gap that you're talking about, Greg, between where this offensive line is going to need to go and need to get to, and these skill position contracts that are going to start coming up, DK, Tyler, so on. Do you like? I've seen some people talk about it. A Seahawks or a news reporter in Seattle wrote about trading DK Metcalf and trying to do that whole thing. I get the feeling that this year in the draft, because of how deep that receiver draft class is, that receiver is secretly actually a need for them, because I view Tyler, the way they've reworked his deal, as Tyler probably isn't on this roster next year, that this is a 1-year deal for Tyler. Like you alluded to, he's kind of already kind of said, I've got other things. I could see him doing a Doug Baldwin next year and being like, okay, see you guys, bye. So does that mean that next year we could see, if DK has a breakout year this year, like truly a breakout year? Because I look at what DK's done, and I still don't think we've seen the top version of DK because, like we've said, the offensive line isn't there to get him the ball. Ryan Grubb's a more vertical pass game kind of guy. Do you think this becomes DK Metcalf and the JSN kind of receiving core for the next 5 years, and they keep DK around? Or do you think DK possibly is done in Seattle in 2 years after his contract?
Well, as it stands now, that is possible because they don't have a quarterback beyond Metcalf's contract. And so it's tough to envision where Metcalf fits in if we don't know who's throwing him the ball, and they don't know who's throwing him the ball. This draft will answer some of that, whether they draft a quarterback highly or not. But your scenario is right. I think that Tyler Lockett is almost at the end of his career, and I wouldn't count on him being a 2025 Seahawk. And then you get into the end of Metcalf's contract, and all of a sudden you're looking at a possible need at wide receiver. Because they have so many other needs in the offensive line, I don't think you prioritize the top of your draft at wide receiver right now. You just did that last year at 20 with Smith and Jigba. But if they let Metcalf's contract end, he will get the biggest contract in NFL history for a wide receiver when he signs. That's how many teams around the league covet his physicality and his physical skills. And the word's out on him, obviously, that he's an elite physical specimen and freak. And he's going to get paid like it. He'll be Devontae Adams 2.0 when he gets his new deal here in a couple of years. Whether the Seahawks want to pay that or not, again, is going to largely depend on how much they're paying their quarterback. Now, the salary cap, of course, is going to go up between now and then. It may not go up over $30 million year over year like it did this year, but their ability to pay will increase. How much will depend on how much they're going to pay their quarterback. It appears, as it stands now, that they're not going to have, unless they go out and get a starting quarterback off the shelf in free agency, which is always going to cost a premium, and we don't see that happening. It doesn't appear they're going to have a quarterback with a salary cap charge of 30 plus million, like Geno Smith's going to be currently scheduled to be next year, beyond 2025. It looks like it'd be more of a developmental younger guy that's cheaper. So maybe they would be able to keep Metcalf in that situation.
Yeah. No, I mean, we both love DK and you're right. The word's out on him. Like, you can't keep that guy a secret. I mean, so it's just going to be a wait and see. I mean, I just want to appreciate DK for the next season or two at least, because I mean, he is fun to watch. I rave about him all the time. Like, especially I hated all the talk when, I know the 15-yarders and the temper, but man, guys, you'd hear fans say, hey, we got to ship this guy out. It was a weird relationship with some of the fans and him. When you look back at other receivers like Doug and Curse and, a lot of love for these guys and from Seahawks fans, it's kind of been a weird relationship with the fans and DK. And especially when you got this guy, just like you said, this physical freak specimen, like it's just, how can you not love the guy and see the value in this dude, especially on the contract you have him on right now. And I agree, he's just going to get paid a boatload. So it's it'd be interesting to see, because right now it's like you and that's, we were excited last season when we drafted JSN. We were like, pick your poison. You got this young guy, DK, Tyler, the backs, and Gino's coming off a good season. And it just, obviously with Shane's philosophy, it just wasn't working, but it just comes back that offensive line. So, hopefully we can tighten that up a little bit. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, we're a few weeks away from the draft, so hopefully we get some answers there. Greg, you're around the team all the time. What, with Mike Macdonald and the new regime, what's been the vibe around in that building, and just around the facility, and compared to prior years? Is there a new excitement? Is there, what's the feel around there right now?
Yeah, there is definitely a freshness and vitality. Everybody's new to everybody. The scouting and personnel staff don't know fully what the coaching staff wants. For 14 years, those guys would go to the combine, this personnel and scouting side, and into a draft, knowing exactly what Pete Carroll and his coaching staff wanted, knowing what the system is, how this player would fit the system. They don't know that now. They're going to try it. They think they've been told by the coaching staff what they like to see, but they haven't seen it proven yet. So it's brand new to them too. But with that means that they're open to almost anything, personnel-wise, approach-wise. I mean, Mike Macdonald's come out and said, we want to be physical running the ball and throw off of that. And that is exactly what Ryan Grubb does in his offense. People think Grubb just throws it around the field all the time. Well, he runs first, like I mentioned with Dylan Johnson, and he's a former offensive line coach. So he values that as much as anybody, to run the ball, to throw off of it. Defensively, the vibe is, let's fix this. This cannot happen again. We cannot be bullied at the line of scrimmage up the middle by running teams, by San Francisco, by the Rams offensive lines, Rams were supposed to have an influx fixed off in development offensive line, and they absolutely steamrolled the Seahawks in week 1 last year. Yeah. So fix this is basically the vibe on defense. And that's why Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams aren't here, not to mention they were expensive. That's why they didn't re-sign Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks. They didn't want more of that. They didn't want a 31st ranked defense again. So they're going to fix right up the spine. And it's not surprising to me that they're going to have 2 new safeties, 2 new inside linebackers, and new interior defensive linemen, because that is where teams gassed them repeatedly the last couple of years. I think of that Pittsburgh game on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I think that's the game that got Pete Carroll fired. I don't think they were convinced I don't think Jody Allen and Burke Cold were convinced until that game that this can't continue. Having the entire lower bowl of Lumen Field with terrible towels, having a team run 40 plus times for 200 plus yards, when if you win that game, you're probably going to the playoffs. That was the death knell. And that was the game that John Schneider said, okay, we're going to do it my way now. And that's when Jody Allen said, okay, we're choosing your way, John. You want to go get new up the middle defensive linemen or defensive players? No more Jamal Adams experiments with the unicorn skills and $70 million contract. No more Quandre Diggs because he's a favorite in the locker room and you like him. No, we're going to fix it on the field with younger, cheaper, faster, more physical players. And that's really what it came down to, is that Jody Allen decided we're chasing out the way that this has gone, especially on defense. We're going with John Schneider's path forward, and we're bringing in a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Macdonald that had the #1 defense in the league last year to do it. That's not going to happen overnight. I thought they were going to bring Patrick Queen in to be the spearheader of that defense with Mike Macdonald. Made a ton of sense. The money that he signed for in Pittsburgh was money that the Seahawks could have afforded, but they prioritized Leonard Williams and spent most of their salary cap space on Williams over Queen and anybody else at that linebacker. And really, they were going to wing it with 1-year guys on the trial basis at middle linebacker. And we'll see if that works. The point is, the defense in 2024 for the Seahawks may not be the defensive answers long term. It's almost like a trial that they're going to have the entire season to see where they are going forward. That's a tough way to win a division.
Yeah, no, Greg, that's kind of like me and Ryan have been going back and forth with different guests and even on the people that listen to our show about what is the 2024 season about? Like, what is it going to be for Seattle? Because, you know, you listen to John on the press conference, we underperformed, we should be better. And then the moves that they've made, to me, are more of like the 2011, 2010 Seahawks when Pete came in and they made all this roster turnover. I view this year more as what 2011 would be, which is we want to be competitive. And like you said, we don't want to get bullied anymore by the Niners and the Rams. Yes, you may still lose those games, but not by getting punched in the mouth and pushed around the yard. Like those years in 2011, Seattle used to fight the Niners pretty tough in that initial start of that Jim Harbaugh era there when they were, you know, having more success to start with. I want to see that. I want to see a defense that's aggressive and plays like Witherspoon across the board. Like that was the one thing last year that I loved watching. Witherspoon played aggressive with a swagger to him. Like I feel you could take Devin Witherspoon and put him on the Legion of Boom teams and he would have fit right in with the mentality and everything. So I think for me, at least this year, I just want to see progress in that. I want to see an offense that's balanced. The offensive line starts to get fixed. I want to see a defense that's aggressive again. That's not going to get 200 yards like that game against Pittsburgh, run right down your throat at home. Like to me, watching that game, it was like, are we even playing at home? Like it was terrible towels everywhere, like you said. Like it just feels like everything that made the 12th man, Seattle different has just disappeared over the last 5 years, and they've never been able to kind of recapture that.
And Burt Cole and Jody Allen thought the same thing, and that's when they decided a change had to be made. What's really strange about this team is, as we're talking about this, the offense and the skill position in Geno Smith and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, they're in a win now window, but they don't have the offensive line currently to do that. But on defense, they're in a building window. So the team is almost split. They've decided to almost start over on defense. I mean, basically, they decided Leonard Williams and Boye Mafe, and they're crossing their fingers that Uchenna Nwosu can return from the torn pec and be the guy he was, and then build around Tariq Woolen and Witherspoon in the secondary. But on offense, it's not like that. So the team it's almost like there's two different philosophies and developments going on different sides of the ball. That's one of the fascinating things about this team that I'm going to be watching for, is how do those two worlds coexist when you're trying to win now on offense and you're trying to develop on defense? And that doesn't often happen in the NFL. It's usually a team-wide thing. Then you throw in the fact that none of the players know any of the coaches. This is really unusual. Most teams, when they do a coaching change, have a lot of holdover coaches, especially position coaches. The coordinators always change. The head coach brings in his coordinators. But there's usually some continuity, like a Chad Morton would stick around at running back coach, for instance. Not so here. There's 22 new coaches out of 23. Carl Scott's the only holdover on the team up from last year for the last couple of years. So that's the only coach among 23 that those guys know. And that's going to take a while. I mean, it's to me a fascinating OTAs and mini camps and training camps. I used to just go out and basically take attendance, check marks, and just watch the same thing I've been watching for 14 years. Same system, different players. This year, it's brand new. How are they going to coach? Is there going to be music during practices? How fast-paced will the practice going to be? Are they going to do more teaching because it's going to be so new rather than just here's how we do it, follow along, or you'll get left behind? So all that's to say that the early results in games may show that it's so new. And in the NFL, you don't have time in a season to ramp up. And again, there's no Sacramento States and Montana States in September to get yourself right for the regular season. That's not how it works. So I'm with you. I don't think the 2024 Seahawks are going to be what John Schneider and Mike Macdonald are going to think their team's going to be overall, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Now, if they hit right and they get Devin Witherspoon type performances from brand new guys, it could work. And then they'd have to hit right on the offensive line too.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that's the offensive line they got to hit on. Do you see any big surprise draft day trades? You know, we are throwing around DK's name, but do you think anything kind of wild? Because like you said, you almost got two different philosophies on the defense and offense. Win now compared to, okay, if things hit right, maybe that can work. So, and John and Mike know that. They have to know that. So do you think they might say, hey, we have a piece here, and DK's contract is coming up in 2 years, maybe he's got top end value. Not that I want to see this guy go. Like I said, I love the guy, I
Right.
rave about him, but could you see any big sort of surprise move like that where they could say, hey, we want to get top end value, and 24 is not going to be the season?
I could see it only if, and this would be a complete departure from what John Schneider's done in 15 years, only if they wanted to move up, say, to the top 5 and take one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft. If they decided that we're going for the generational quarterback we didn't get last year because Richardson went to the Colts, they could trade Metcalf and get a top 5, and say trade Metcalf, a 3rd round, a 5th round, however the draft value chart ends up rolling out, and you get a top 5 pick and perhaps a middle round pick, extra pick. Then, that would be a go for it move at quarterback. But again, it is totally John Schneider's nature to do exactly the opposite and trade back. And again, DK Metcalf, Ryan Grubb wants to coach DK Metcalf. You can believe that inside his offense. DK Metcalf would be the Roma Duze of Ryan Grubb's Seahawks offense. So I don't see that happening unless they want to go for broke at quarterback.
So speaking about the draft kind of philosophies and a little bit of that, do you see, Greg, because you've been a part of that for, like you said, 14 years with Pete Carroll and John Schneider. John's come out numerous times and said in his show on 7 and 10 that, hey, nothing's going to change. It's the same. I've always had control. Is that the case where John mainly had control, or was there more to the Pete-John relationship in the draft? And do you think now that John does have full control, we may see a different draft strategy going forward?
Yeah, I think it is going to be different. Let's be clear that the Seahawks made sure that Pete Carroll, they gave him the title of executive vice president and told him he had final football authority because that was the only way to get him out of USC. He didn't want a similar situation he had at the Jets and the Patriots, and he get fired by someone who had authority over him in football ops. So he hired John Schneider. People that newer Seahawks fans may not realize they hired Pete Carroll 3 weeks before they hired John Schneider. And they hired Pete Carroll saying, well, we're going to hire you and you're going to be the final football state, but we don't have a GM yet. Can you help us get one? And so it was Carroll before Schneider, which is unusual. The GM usually hires the coach. And so that was always the backdrop to everything they did. Now, if there was one thing of football operate now, signings, trades, the Jamal Adams trade, even choosing Devin Witherspoon to 5, that's Pete Carroll. But if there was one thing that John Schneider had more latitude than anything else in football ops, it was the draft. He's a draft guy. He came up from the personnel side with Green Bay. He's a scout at heart. He loves the draft. He goes, when the Seahawks play in New England or Miami or Indianapolis on a Sunday, he goes to a college game on a Saturday. Now, he's not the only NFL GM that does it, but he loves doing it. And he'll go in on a Friday and talk to the janitor at the dorm that the kid lives in and talk to all the assistant coaches. And he loves that stuff. So if there was one thing that he had a little more authority, it was in the draft. But when they were on the clock and it was, who are you going to draft? Pete Carroll had the final approval of that. That's gone. And now John Schneider has the approval of everything. Coaching staff, players, drafting, scouting, it's all him. And so now when they're on the clock, John Schneider's going to turn to Mike Macdonald and tell him who that we're picking, not Pete Carroll turning to John Schneider. That's a completely different dynamic. So yes, it has changed, and we don't really know for sure what that's going to look like. We know the type of drafts that John Schneider wants to have. It's heavy in second and third day picks and depth, and he always wants to add onto what he already has. He may not be the type that goes for Devin Witherspoon or top end. He won't definitely not seek to trade up, but the players they pick will be John Schneider's players, not Pete Carroll / John Schneider's players. And that's the first time in 15 years you can say that.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, one last thing from me anyways, just touching on Matt Thomas, their cap specialist, moving on there. Kind of an interesting move there. What did you hear about that? What's your take on that, and how did that all happen?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Ryan. It is oddly timed because most of these type deals, a salary cap executive, somebody in contract negotiations as deeply as Thomas was, would leave in January before free agency, before the salary caps, and you're making cuts to the cap and all of that. So the timing is odd, and we're hoping he's healthy and everything's okay. And he's a really good guy and has been around the team. Even during the Mike Holmgren days, he was still around the Seahawks. John Schneider went out of his way to credit Matt Thomas for just about every contract done with the Seahawks. When it was time to call agents and say, well, no, we can only go this far, or let's structure the contract this way, that was Matt Thomas. That wasn't John Schneider. So that's a big deal to have a new guy in that role. Now they bring the guy from Green Bay, who Schneider knows because he knows everybody in Green Bay because he's born and raised there and came up through the Packers. But he's largely unproven. And this will be a different dynamic. It'd be just like you working with Bryce for 11 years, and then all of a sudden you get Joe Schmo from Idaho hosting your show. That's going to take some time to develop a chemistry. It's the same thing in these negotiations. So the timing of it is different. I guess in the timing of it will work in the Seahawks way because they don't have big contracts to negotiate here until next free agency, really. So there's some ramp up time that they can familiarize each other. But yeah, I was surprised to see that. And I guess my best hope is that he's healthy and okay because the timing of it seems so out of the blue to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, we really appreciate you coming on and talking Seahawks for almost an hour here with us. We follow your work. We really respect your stuff. And so
thank you.
Why don't you let everyone watching and listen to our show how what you got going on and how everybody can find all your work.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the work you guys do and the dedication to the Seahawk fans that you do, and really appreciate you having me on. I'm on Twitter, X, whatever they call it now, at gbellseattle. TheNewsTribune.com is where all my stories are. And this week I started a 10 to 12 stint as a host of KJR's mid-morning radio, sports radio program. Chris Kidd and I are starting to do that. And that's for the time being, at least. We'll see if that ends up being a longer term thing or not. But there's, as you know, a lot of changes at that station. Let me say publicly, I really like Jim Moore and Jason Puckett. They're friends of mine. I really respect Jim Moore. I've known him since he was a Sonics beat writer for the PI. Feel really badly about how all that went down. And it's a little awkward taking their spot, their time slot, right after how that went down. But yeah, cool stuff going on. I'm also busy coaching my high school baseball team. I'm the varsity coach at University Prep here in Northeast Seattle. It's doing most of my time right now. But no, it's going to be a very interesting season for Seahawks fans. It's not the same old. Everything's new. And even down to the way they practice is going to be brand new here starting a couple of weeks in OTAs and mini camps. But I appreciate both of you, Ryan and Bryce, for all you do and for having me on. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate. Yeah, like I said, we appreciate having you on, and I'd love to have you on in the future. And
anytime, thank you.
All right, we'll and we're all excited for this draft and this season because we agree. We're just we're pumped for the new regime and just excited to see how things unravel, unfold, and yeah, just go Hawks here. So
take care of that little one.
I will. Will do. All right, Greg. Appreciate it.
Well,
thanks,
guys.
Greg.
Hey guys, that was Gregg Bell, NFL writer and a Seahawks beat reporter, and he writes for the Tacoma Tribune. Man, that was awesome having Greg on, man. Like, just a guy that's been around the team for a long time, knows the team inside and out, and just getting some of his insights, from the quarterback situation. And just, not afraid to kind of say how it is, you know what I mean? Like when he was touching on the offensive line, when I brought up the offensive line, it's like, hey, what do you think? Are we done? And he was going through it. And he's at 60% of the offensive line. Then he got over to 80% of the offensive line. And it's starting to really worry you, man. And obviously Gregg was really concerned, and I kind of got the feeling that he just doesn't have confidence right now going into the season. And you know, you can only do so much in the draft. You can bring in the best rookies. It's going to take time. So, you know, that's tough. And it is good that you got Ryan Grubb. He's more of a vertical guy and stuff like this. But, you know, and then you brought up the point, hey, like, Gregg, why has it been after Max in 10 years? And you know, maybe Russ was there and he's running and scatting around. So maybe you don't feel like you got to address it. But, you know, there comes a time, you know, and he's like, we got to stop this. We have to fix it.
No, 100%. And it was amazing to have Gregg on, and his, like you said, his insight. Like, he's in that building. He has sources in there that are going to tell him things that the average person isn't going to know watching the game on Sunday. And listening to him talk, like you said, go through our offensive line. And as he got through it, I was sitting there going, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit,
No,
we've
you're
got a
right.
problem. Like, you don't think about it. Like, you know, you got the average fan that may throw on the game and watch it and think, oh, because he's in the NFL, he's good. Or, you know, you go on Madden and you look at the Madden ratings, you're like, oh, we're not so bad. Like, like, you listen to him talk through that offensive line and just what he's talking about, and you're like, fuck, they got to get this right. Like, they've got to fix this. And I honestly believe now with Scott Huff and Ryan Grubb both being offensive line guys, that's their background. I don't know how that doesn't get addressed. And I really think, like what he said about Pete and what he expected of, you know, Cable and Solari and Andy Dickerson. Hey, I need you to take this chicken shit and make chicken salad out of it. And that's how we're going to run our, and like, it was like putting duct tape on a giant hole on a ship. Like, it's not going to hold. It may hold for a little bit, but it's not going to hold. And so listening to Gregg talk about it and, you know, that whole thing, I don't see how this doesn't get fixed, but I don't think it gets fixed in 1 year and in one draft and in one offseason. It's going to take probably, I don't see this offensive line getting fixed until, I don't think we have a solid offensive line, man, until 2026.
Yeah.
That's what I'm feeling, just because 2 drafts, 2 off seasons to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could disagree with you, man. I really do. And it's not us being sour on the team and all this kind of stuff, but we're looking at reality, right? Like you said, to expect just because we got this new regime, because Ryan Grubb's coming in, you still, you know, like, yeah, they will address it in the draft, but you can only do so much in the first off-season draft. And like Gregg, you know, talked about, you're bringing in these guys that, you know, have started, never really started, or, you know, backup center, and then you're bringing in these undersized guys. So, you know, even what he's done so far, it was no big splash. And like he said, the guard market was crazy. You know, like our own guy, Damian Lewis, signs for that massive deal. So it's tough. You like he said, the best way to do it is organically through the draft, but that takes time and it takes the right place. So you will see. And then, you know, it was cool, man, talking to him about, you know, even DK and guys, you know, we love DK, and, you know, how is he going to fit in as far as like, is he a piece? Is he a trade bait piece? I mean, it's been thrown out there. I don't want to see it happen, but it's just interesting when he brought up the two sides of the football aren't really on the same page. And again, that gets you thinking like, yeah, you know, you got a guy like Tyler Lockett that is on his way out. He's a veteran guy. If the defense is on the same page, like, that's a great piece. But, you know, what are you doing with them there? Or are you just hoping it all sort of clicks? Like Gregg says, if things click, then yeah, like if these 1 year guys at linebacker just click and they're try out, what you quote unquote you want to call that, and then they get extended, you know, with a young guy in there, you know, things can click. But the reality is, what how realistic is that? You know what I mean?
Well, that was a really, I'd never thought of this team the way that Gregg described it, being your offense is in win now, your defense is in rebuild. And I'm like he said, you usually don't see that in a franchise. It's all in one thing. They're all either in rebuild or all in win now. And for me, what I wonder, and this is just me, I didn't, you know, say this, but spitballing here is, do you have the offense built that way so you don't tank? Right? You're not, because if you're full in rebuild, you're not tanking, but you're a lower seeding team. You're gonna have a top 10 pick. if you're split like they kind of are, does this offense carry you enough to 7, maybe 10 wins if you get lucky one day?
Mm-hmm.
Between that and you're pushing for the playoffs, because we know Jody Allen's standard is not to go 4-13.
Right.
It's to be pushing for playoffs. John's is pushing for playoffs, pushing to be a championship team. And if you fully went into the rebuild mode, you're not doing that.
Right.
And so I wonder if it's, hey, our offense is going to keep us afloat enough for this defense, which we do have talent on, to
Yeah.
catch up in a
Right.
year or two. Like next year, 2025, this defense is more on par. But I did think it was interesting when we did talk about quarterbacks, when we talk about fixing this offensive line and allocation of money and DK and all that. Truly having a rookie quarterback on a 4 or 5 year rookie deal changes the landscape of your cap situation, like
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
And I just look at it and I go, you know, I've started to deep dive more into that back end of the draft because I don't think we're getting Michael Penix. I truly think
Yeah.
Michael Penix is going to the Raiders. I don't think he gets
Yeah.
by them. And so then I think Seattle trades back. They get some O-line, D-line. There's 3 guys or 4 for me that I've been looking at, and I think our fans should really dive into looking at. Joe Milton is one of them. Jordan Travis from Florida State is another to look at. We've talked numerously about Spencer Rattler.
Mm.
And the other one is Matt Pratt out of Tulane.
Mm.
Matt Pratt I've watched a lot of his film. He has started to surprise me a lot in what I think he's actually capable of doing. And this is the thing I think a lot of people sometimes forget about quarterbacks, and draft and this and that. There are guys making millions of dollars that screw these decisions up royally constantly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't matter what school you go to. Like you look back at some of the guys like Steve Young went to BYU when it wasn't really a predominant program. And you had some of these other guys that have been successful NFL quarterbacks that didn't come out of, big time schools. Brock Purdy even came out of Iowa State. Like you don't have to go to a big school to translate to being a great NFL quarterback. I would be interested in any one of those guys ending up on Seattle's roster because like Greg said, neither Geno or Sam Howell are on our roster past 2025 currently.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And you look at the Sam Howell thing, and I never really looked too deep into that, but he's absolutely right. So, when you look at it like that and you look at the contract situation with both Sam, like unless they have this vision of Sam to transition to the starter and they just see something that not everyone's really seeing, like, yeah, there's definitely some like things you like about Sam, but just with all that talked about, this is the time to go get one. And like you said, if Penix is there, sure. But like Greg said, you think John's going to sit there between 16 and 81 and play solitaire? No. So you probably are going to move down unless they love him so much at 16 and he's there at 16, like to your point, like you think he's gone to the Raiders or before 16. So unless you're like, I like this guy so much, we're going to aggressively trade dudes to get to the top 10, then there's the likelihood Penix is gone. You move down, you accumulate picks. And like to your point, you look at that guy, you look at the upside, you look at the Joe Miltons with the massive arm, you look at the Spencer Rattler and the other 2 guys that you talked about, because you got to, and you need that guy that you just take
can't
a
put your egg in
chance
the
on.
basket.
No, exactly. So, but all that being said, man, like just the whole time with Greg, that was awesome. Just having him on, like he was just everything we talked about. He was right in there because here's a guy. He's the beat writer for the team. He's around the team all the time, so he gets that extra stuff that a lot of guys like ourselves just you're just not around like that. So it was awesome having him on, and yeah, man, just awesome episode.
Well, that was fantastic. And, Greg just reached back out to me and he said, anytime we want him to come on, he's more than willing to come on and talk with us. So our listeners definitely expect Gregg Bell to be back on our show. It's going to be a lot of fun throughout the season with him, and hopefully we can get him back after the draft, kind of sort out what Seattle decided to do going into training camp and see what that's all going to be like.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to have Greg back on, hopefully some point between camp and the draft or something, because yeah, his insight's awesome. So You know what, guys? We're gonna sign off for today, and but we got some good stuff coming up too in the near stuff. Some more mocks, a few more guys coming on, and so you're not gonna want to miss that stuff either. So that's it for us today, man. So yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.